We are live. Hi, Laura. Welcome to Venture with Grace today.
Hi, Grace. Thanks for having me.
So to start off the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. Previously, before working at Lightspeed, you have worked at Meta, Figma, Thumbtack, and you help scale the companies. And why don't we start with how you got into, recruiting and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, this is always a fun question to answer. I feel like a lot of people in recruiting, it's kind of something that found me in a lot of ways. After school, I went to graduate school, got my master's. I focused a lot on like oral histories, and so always just love that aspect of really like the listening piece and like trying to figure out, right, like what does this mean? What is this person saying? Not just the words they're saying, but like what does their body, their emotions, everything say to me? And after school was really trying to figure out like what am I going to do next, and actually ended up finding a role that was an executive assistant role at like a social impact consulting firm, but it turned out they also had a talent team that needed support, and so I was like, sure, I'll do that. Ended up really loving the talent piece of like just seeing how the process worked, being able to interface with candidates, all of that. And so really decided I wanted to try and find something that was pretty squarely in the talent space. And that's when I made my first jump into the startup world. Also, I joined Thumbtack. I want to say they had just raised their Series B. The company was about 55 people, I think, when I joined, which I think a lot of people who have been at companies that stage will tell you that number of employee like growth is always a really like fun, exciting time, but there's also growing pains. And so Thumbtack was an amazing place to work. And I got to work on some really cool things because of the natural growing pains that happen at that size. So on the talent side, it was a lot focused on like interviewer capacity, because for the first time, we were hiring so quickly that engineers were like, hey, I can't do 4 interviews a day every day, which then led to other programs like interview training, referral programs. And so I had a lot of exposure to the program side of talent, and then had a really cool opportunity from there to join Figma. So at this stage, Figma was in stealth. They were seed stage. I think I was the seventh hire or like ninth or 10th employee, and joined them on the talent team and was able to really see what it was like to hire for a company when, you didn't have the the name recognition, right? Because you're in stealth. So like you don't want anyone to know, and kind of how to approach that, how to, hire those early employees, and a lot of the exposure that comes with being at a company early and seeing, all the really high highs and some of the low lows. So had a great time there, and then made the jump to kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. Went to Facebook, right? Went from these early stage startups to very public companies, and really went there because there was a cool opportunity to help build out what leadership hiring at the director and above level looked like within engineering. And so went there with the plan to stay 2 or 3 years, ended up staying 5.5, really building out a process there for director engineering hiring, building out a team. I think my team was about 30 when I left, and came to Lightspeed Venture Partners, where I'm on the executive talent team, focused on supporting a lot of our early stage companies with executive hiring within product engineering, data, and design.
Mm, I think your role is like really crucial, as I think literally every VC firm say their value add is to like help the executive build up their team. And I feel like the major value add of a VC is like number one is like of course capital, and then number two is like the connection it comes with, or helping people build up their like early on team to a degree.
Yep.
And I wanted to and then you also had experience in both as a seventh employee of Figma to like Series B company like Thumbtack to eventually at Facebook, running like a matured company. You've seen a lot of different stage of like how company grow. I wonder, why don't we start with like as a early stage startup, how do you I feel like people is like the core thing of making and breaking it.
Mhm.
Um, can you give us some example of how do you think about hiring a particular role for like startups? And then can you walk us through like maybe the most recent startup that you were helping with, like what kind of problem they're encountering, and how did you kind of bring the VP of engineering or VP of product into their team? We don't have to
Yeah,
name
yeah.
names, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, let me start answering that question, and you can, like, interject if you have questions, because I feel
Mhm,
like when I think about the process, I could probably talk to you for, like, 3 hours about that.
mhm,
But I think one thing, especially I mean, I think this is for any stage, but with companies I work with, there's always this piece of really honing in on what do I need versus what do I want, right?
mhm,
Because sometimes it's easy to think like, I want someone who can lead a 100-person engineering team and has this like great organizational leadership experience. But really, what you need over the next 12, 18, 24 months is someone who's more of a player coach leading a team of, 12, 15, 20. And so, really, separating those and becoming clear on that. And
mhm,
then thinking about what do I need this person to accomplish in the next 6 to 12 months in order to say this was a successful hire? And usually, really making 3, maybe 4 like very clear outcomes. Because I think what that does is it really helps ground that what do I need? And it also gives you competency areas to be thinking about and evaluating as you're meeting with candidates. Because
mhm,
I think sometimes when you start a search, what's really exciting about it is there's so many possibilities of what this person we hire can
mhm,
bring. And I think that's great. And I think that there are so many different ways that, perspectives that you can approach it from. But you also do need to narrow a little bit to make sure that you're hiring the person the company needs now and then, you know, 12, 24 months in the future, maybe beyond, but you don't need to hire the person that you need in 6 years, for example.
mhm, mhm.
Um,
Okay.
and oh, Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sorry, keep going. Yeah, I think that's like really good because I feel like I guess like I wonder when you are thinking about if you're a startup founder, if you're like the chief people officer of a startup today, um, like how do you build out like let's say like the 10-year plan of how we grow the company? I know maybe it sounds like so far away, but I feel like any venture capital investor, like people have to look things long term. As a C-level executive at a startup, how would you think about, what do we need to do in like 2 year, 5 year, 7 year? And eventually, we ideally we IPO, right? So like how
Right.
how do you think about the journey on the talent side of things?
Yeah, I mean, so I've never been a chief people officer. It's not really a role or an area that I focus on, but I imagine as they're approaching that is you want to have that long-term plan and that kind of path that you're laying out. But at the same time, like part of this path when you're an early stage company is being really nimble and being able to adjust as you need to in the market. So I don't think there's always necessarily, especially at the early stages, hey, here is an exact roadmap for what our product is going to be, what our team is going to look like in 10 years, because you don't know what the market is going to dictate. You don't know what
Mhm,
changes you might make. You don't know what people you might hire, right? Maybe you hire someone who can fill 2 roles that you thought you were going to need 2 people for, or vice versa. So I think in terms of like vision, it's there, but I don't think the tactical pieces are things that people are planning like 10 years in advance.
got it. As for, since you're specializing in VP of engineering and VP of product, how do you kind of like find people and like, I guess like either approach them or like they're in your existing talent pool that you build? Um, yeah, like, and then something really interesting to me, you just mentioned about is like the name recognition, right? Like, let's say when you have 7 people at Figma, it's a sales company. I think that's where a lot of the AI startups are at today. And how do you fight over talent in a really competitive landscape? And where do you kind of like pull people from in
Yeah.
general?
Yeah, so, I mean, this has, like, a bunch of different answers, I feel like. I think one is, like, where do I find people? I just network with people, right? Like, I'm
Mhm,
always if there is someone who is a engineering leader, product leader, and someone in my network reaches out and they're like, "Do you want to meet this person? I worked with them. I think they're great." Like I will always say yes, like absolutely. So for me, I'm always just expanding that network. I'm always just looking for people to meet, especially when it's someone who someone else is telling me like, "Hey, I worked with them. I'm great."
Mhm.
But at the same time, like I want to expand my network outside my own networks, right?
Mhm.
I don't want to keep this like bubble that, I've built enclosed.
Mhm.
So I will just reach out to people if there's a really cool company they've been at, or, I saw that there was a really neat launch somewhere and like I just want to meet the product leader who, was part of that. I'll just reach out and get to know them. And then maybe it turns out a year later, they're looking and there's a role. So I go back to that and I'm able to kind of introduce them to that company. So it's all about building the long term relationships when it's on the leadership side. I would say on the branding piece, when it's an early stage company, like you're definitely hiring people because they're excited by the product and they're excited to be building, they're excited about the impact. So I think there is a little bit of like a natural opt out where if what is important to the candidate is a public compensation package where they have liquid equity right away, like it's not a good fit. If they're only interested in brand recognition, which I can understand both sides of that, like maybe it's not the best fit. So definitely having a founder who can do some outreach, I always
Mhm.
think helps, who can show the product if you're in stealth, right? Do a demo for the person is like a really great way. And then use the advantages you have, which are when you're a small company, like everyone is part of recruiting, everyone is, selling people, everyone is showing the impact they can have. I remember at Figma for an intern we were trying to hire. I can't remember where his competing offers were. But he really loved like this type of like dance music video. So I
Mhm.
found an example on YouTube and the whole company, we learned the dance and we went in the basement and we
Oh
filmed it.
my
And
god.
then we sent it to him as our way of being like, "We want you to come join us." And so not to say that, like, that's how you should approach executive hiring, obviously, but, those are just, like, things that you can do when you're an earlier stage company that, like, Facebook would never do.
Yeah, oh my god, that's so fun. I wanna watch the video. We need to insert the clip here for, like,
I don't
added
even know who has it. Like, I have no idea who has it, which is
Oh my
probably
god.
for the best. It should probably just stay wherever it is.
I also wanna say hi to the audience. Hi, Caitlin. I don't I'm maybe butchering your name. She said, "You are a stealth expert." But anyway, okay, so I wonder when you're thinking about I really love that, and I wonder, like, when you're trying to meet like, so I guess, like, what are some mistakes that you feel like the early stage startup is making? Is that, like, they're trying to hire, like, I don't know, the VP of Google or something to build up their team?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't wanna, like, paint broad strokes and say that, like, hiring a VP of Google is not the right move, but I think it's maybe this separation of like what I want and need is, hey, we need someone who's hands-on player coach, can lead a small team, but then getting a little bit sidetracked by like, hey, this person was a VP at Google. I bet, that'd be so cool to have them at our company. They probably could attract really strong talent, pull people from Google, but you need to really think of what we need to accomplish in the next 12 to 24 months. Is that this person's strengths? Or is that person maybe a little bit better for what we need in 5 years? And
Mhm,
just making sure that you're evaluating that in the interview process and being really just transparent with the candidate. Because what I've learned, especially at the executive levels, is candidates don't want to be set up to not succeed, right? So if you tell them, like, hey, this is what we're looking for, this is what they need, it's always a double opt-in process. So there's a lot of really strong executives who would just say like, "That's amazing, but like either that's not what I, am super excited to do, or that's not where my strength is. You can find someone better at that for cheaper than me." And so I think just being very clear with those conversations, and I always go back to this, and I know that founders, hiring managers, it's like it's more time and they have so much going on. But having some type of scorecard or something that is making sure that you're evaluating the same things consistently across candidates is super helpful. I also always say, if you can, cohort your candidates. I think
mm,
it's tricky if you're starting a process and maybe you get one person, right, who you're interviewing,
mhm,
but then you don't have anyone else in that cohort to compare them to. Or maybe you have 2 or 3. Like, try and get, 4, maybe 5 candidates so that you can really figure out, like, the skills I want, like, what is resonating, what's not, what are my questions, concerns, because that also is really a better experience for the candidates also.
Mm. I wanna ask a question. I wanna unpack this a little bit. Like, you mentioned like cohort candidates. Like, one thing I'm curious about, like, since you are non-technical, how do you vet the technical piece of the talent? Since like VP of engineering and VP of product are like likely to be very technical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, a lot of Google searches, but in reality, I think especially at the executive level, people are technical. They have been very technical. And what I typically am asking a lot about are more like, what's the hardest problem you solved? So at that point, I don't need to be the expert on the technical piece that they're
Mhm.
talking about, right? I just need to know that they talk about it. They can go into detail. I like to read like what was are they very interested in technical problems? Like, you can tell a lot when people talk about technical problems, like, is this your passion? Or is it when I ask about, something around organizational change or people management? Is that where they really light up? Because most leaders, like, might lean a little bit more one way or the other. And so I'm not always going into the super, super, like, nitty-gritty technical pieces unless the company has a very unique technical problem that does require the technical expertise. But also, at the exec level, a lot of the initial conversations are also happening between the founder or the C level and the candidate. Because at the beginning, you're doing this double selling. Like, it's not just meeting the candidate, asking them questions, screening them to see if they're a fit. There's also you selling the opportunity, selling the company before you really dive into that. And so I always like to remind people whenever they do like first conversations is it's usually a pretty even split between like asking questions and selling the role opportunity, all of those pieces as well.
Mm. I wonder when you mention about like, to batch like 4 to 5 candidate together as a cohort, how many people do you guys typically screen to, find the right candidate? Is there like a average number? And how does the process look like? For example, let's say like I'm a founder of a company, I come to you and I'm like, Laura, we need to hire like this guy by tomorrow. What do you
Yeah.
say to me?
So honestly, so the way that we are working with our portfolio companies, it's not always like us running a full search for them. So typically what would happen is a founder came, if they said, I need this person tomorrow, like we are not making progress, everything is breaking. What I would say is, okay, great. I'm going to go through my network. I'm going to see who I know. I'm going to introduce you to those people immediately. But in parallel, let me introduce you to search firms because that's going to be the quickest way to get it done. And so they will take the path of, hey, talk to the people that we introduce that we know, start the process with those, but then also get working with the search firm. If they say, hey, we need to hire this VP of engineering, it's like, it's urgent, but like we have some time, we have a good leader in place right now. We'll take the same approach. We'll introduce people from our network. We'll help them have those conversations. We may also introduce some benchmark candidates. I always recommend that leaders who are hiring do that because it helps them kind of put some boundaries on what they need. It helps them see um, what skills they want to optimize for. So oftentimes those are leaders who are not looking for new roles, but who we know have maybe gone through the same problems of the person they want to hire. And so
Mhm.
can really give them a good perspective on what a really strong candidate might look like. So that as they do start interviewing, they have someone who they can use as kind of that benchmark. Um, and I'm like losing my train of thought completely. But oh, so the process for if we're, working with a CEO, founder, whatever it might be. So we'll help them through that. We'll also, help them think through their own networks, where else to look. Add the candidates in, we can, help figure out how to time the process, how to do the interview loop, what types of questions, what types of structure. So usually we're supporting them in it, and we're not running it the way that like a search firm would run it.
Mm. Okay, so what's the difference between like a executive talent position to like you mentioned like search firm.
Yeah, so executive talent, I mean, I would say that the executive talent umbrella means something different at every company. So executive talent at Facebook, I was on that team, and we would be assigned, internal roles that we would work on and we would
Mhm,
fill. So it worked a little bit more like how a search firm would work. Here we're supporting, so me and one other person, we do everything across the portfolio for product engineering data design. That's over 400 portfolio companies. So
mhm,
we don't just have the capacity to be able to run searches the way a search firm would for every single portfolio company. And so what we're really doing is we're basically making sure that our companies hire the best person for these executive roles. And
mhm,
so that's why it doesn't always take the form of, hey, we're running this search and filling it for you. It's often we're going to make sure that you're able to run a really successful process, or we're going to make sure that you are working with the best search firm for your specific stage, role, location. Or sometimes it is, we know great people for this. We're going to introduce them, and you're going to hire someone that we know. So it takes a lot of different forms, just depending on the situation.
mm. I wonder, so if you're suggesting the CEO to look within their own network to find like a key hire, where would they typically look?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times it's not just, okay, who do I know who could fill this role, but just keeping in touch with the really great people you worked with who have gone on to also work at really great places and would just have people in their networks. Like sometimes it's just getting word of mouth out there that you're looking. And this is especially really great too if you are an earlier stage company where maybe, like we talked about, you don't have like the brand recognition. But if someone who's worked with you can say, like, hey, this person was super smart, like, you should go hear about what they're building, that's a great way to get candidates into conversations. And this is always a hard one, I know, because time is like that number one resource constraint that every founder has. And
Mhm,
so, of course, like you want to prioritize meeting with people who are active candidates, but also just building your network is going to just make you such a strong recruiter over the course of your career. And so, really prioritizing that and making sure that that's a muscle that you're continuing to build while you're going through the formal like hiring process.
mm. Let's say if I'm building, let's say, a OpenAI competitor, and then now I'm, like, trying to approach someone from OpenAI. As a startup that raised, like, $3 million with, like, 2 core people on my team, how do I go after, like, the tier 1 talents?
I mean, I would probably say like I would ask questions about why it feels like OpenAI talent is
Mhm.
who
Okay,
you
so
need to go after.
here's my pitch. Okay, here's my pitch. The thing is like, okay, I'm trying to raise money, okay? As a CEO, every day you have to raise money. Okay, by the way, this is like a complete fake, okay? Listeners, this is fake. Please do not sue me or whatever. Okay, so I just want to give people some context. So I feel like I've heard people, basically, I think as a C-level person, you have to think about like how VCs think about things. So like VC think about, oh, if you can approach someone from OpenAI, this startup is worth like I don't know, like $2 trillion right now. So like I feel like this is like a general concept, right? Like people are thinking if I can hire someone from like a really competitive market, that means like it demonstrate like how amazing our product is, how amazing our team is, like blah blah blah. So now I feel like that's a reason why people want to approach someone from there. And then also people also think like, it's amazing company and they probably know a lot of like the newest AI trends than like, 95% people on the in the market right now. So I feel like there's some really good reasons to try to hire them. But
Yep.
how do you go about like, helping this team to like hire their like, OpenAI person?
And it's like an executive at OpenAI?
Um,
I mean, I guess the
sure.
part that's hard with OpenAI is that it's like also a lot of those executives are newer in those roles. So like if they were willing to leave after being there, 6 months or so, my question would be why. Like,
Mm,
I would want the company to, like, dig into that, like, get more
mhm,
information. But I mean, what I would say is I would ask the company, I would say, "Pitch me, like, how are you pitching this person the role? Like, why should they come work at your company instead of OpenAI?" Right? And there's probably a reason. Usually it's around impact, right?
mhm,
And so, like, that's how you would have to approach it. But honestly, like, in this situation, I don't know. I'm not an investor, so I definitely, like, don't want this to be taken that way at all, but I don't know that just because you pulled talent from OpenAI,
mhm,
I would look at it as a talent person and say, "Wow, that company must be really good."
mm,
Like, I think, yes, obviously, I would be like, "Hey, that's really impressive, like, they must, have had a really compelling case or they know," but I don't know that I would say, like, "Oh, let's definitely give money because they hired someone from OpenAI." But at the same
mhm,
time, remember, OpenAI is hiring a lot of people recently, so what I would do is I would say, "Where's OpenAI hiring all their people from?" And I would go
mm,
get the people they haven't hired yet.
mm. Where is OpenAI hiring from right now?
I don't work at OpenAI.
I mean, like, I feel like okay, so I have a couple questions there. One is, let's say, um, I'm an emerging fund manager and then trying to find like Laura on my team. So let's say because I feel like everybody's value add is like obviously capital and talent. And if I'm trying to find like the um earlier stage Laura to be on my team to help me build up this like, executive talent arm, where would you look?
Hmm. I mean, I would look at maybe think about startups that have had successful IPOs in the past few years, and I would
Mhm,
look at who was there during their various growth stages, getting to
mhm,
there, who went through that. I would look at, what are the very successful startups that we see now? Um, who are the people that helped build those teams? Like, who was there early? I don't think there's a one size fits all. Like, I've never been at a company while
mhm,
it was going through IPO, right? I have this,
mhm,
like, early stage experience, and I
mhm,
have this late stage experience, and I think that's okay. I don't think you need someone who's necessarily done it all, but I
mhm,
think someone who has seen various stages of companies and have been at strong companies
mhm.
at times when they were going through something is a pretty good signal, that they might be able to help you and help your companies build really successful teams.
Mm. Okay. So let's say if like what does like the next generation like A, C, and Z look like in your eye? So like I mean, we've seen like, obviously like A, C, and Z, it's just an example of like a mega pool of like amazing talent from everywhere and obviously Lightspeed too. So like I guess like build up the platform team is kind of like a table stake right now for every VC firm.
Mhm.
For the next generation emerging managers who are listening to this podcast, what's your suggestion for them to like build up their edge to, like to build like a robust like supporting ecosystem for
Mhm.
founders? You feel like that's kind of like a white space in the industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to how you build out most teams is don't look for people who all have the same strengths and experience, right? Like really map out your team the same way you would if you were, leading a team in-house. Do some type of talent review and look at like where are people's strengths, where are their experience, and build a team that doesn't have a ton of overlap on that. So if I look at the executive talent team at Lightspeed, what I love about it is we are a mix of people who come from in-house experience. Within the people who come from in-house, I don't have going through an IPO experience. I have early. The other person has gone through IPOs, right?
Mhm,
So like even on the in-house spectrum, we complement each other. On the other side, we have people who come from search firms. But even
Mhm.
within search firms, they're coming from different search firms. They have different functional experience. And so on that side, they're also complementing each other.
Mm.
And I would do the same across the entire platform team because what I think is really useful as you're helping build companies is having people who have expertise in different areas that you can call on. Like when I meet with a company, I don't have to be the expert across every area because
Mhm.
I know that someone else on my team is, and I can call on them to jump in and to help with that. And so that's really the main thing. Like when you hire that first person, it doesn't need to be like a very specific mold. Just know as
Mhm.
you continue adding that you want to complement them, that you want a different type of experience. So you're not just replicating the same person, even if they have like an amazing background.
Mm. I really love what you said about like, having diversity on your team. Um, really helps. But like I wonder, if you are like, what do you think is like the core person you need that's like gonna be very crucial for people investing in like pre-seed or seed? Those are like early stages companies, right? I guess like when you are trying to either be the chief recruiting officer for the startups you invested in, or like trying to like basically like having someone like yourself to convince them to join the team. I guess like what do you think the core ability of you or like that person should have to kind of like handle like I would say 80% of the problem that early stage people
Yeah.
have?
I mean, honestly, and I don't know if this is like a non-answer, but like having a good network, because again, you can't know the answer to every question.
Mhm.
But if you know the people who know the answers, like
Mhm.
that's still a really valuable resource. And it also, right, instead of the company having to figure out every time they have a question, like, okay, what 7 people should I ask? If you can go ask someone in your network who knows an expert and you can go back and you can let the company know, like that's great. And this is something I've had to learn too is it's not fun to be like, I don't know when someone asks you a question. But honestly, if you can go get the answer, they would much rather have to wait a few hours, half a day, than have you give them the wrong information because you're too afraid to say, I don't
Mhm.
know. But for early stage companies, I think the things that come up often are sometimes it's things like we need to set up, like, do we need an ATS yet? Or like, can we wait till we're a little bit bigger? It might be like, what do benefits look like for companies our stage? Like, can you tell us what other companies are offering at seed stage? It might be, how do we interview for this type of engineering role that we haven't hired for yet? Like, who should be on the interview loop? So there's just like a lot of different questions about setting up the infrastructure of a company and setting up the infrastructure for how the company is going to grow on the people side, that I think come up in addition to the work that we're doing on like the more leadership executive talent side. But so, I field questions that aren't exec talent related, sometimes, and that's okay too. So I don't think you need to find someone who is like an expert in building companies from seed stage.
Mhm.
But someone who has a network of people who can do it, someone who has, seen enough things happen that they know general trends and advice to give.
Mm. I wonder, I wanna double click on like building a network and just like the importance of a network. I think having a quote unquote big network isn't necessarily like an effective network. I wonder how do you build an effective network and how do you keep it fresh? Because I think if I met someone this year and then like I already forgot about them, like 3 years later, maybe they start a company or something, I feel like it's maybe just like not as effective. Maybe you send them like a birthday note, like happy birthday every year or happy new year
Yeah.
every year. I feel like that's my max. So I wonder how do you systematically build something that's like keeping yourself like, quote unquote rent free on like in everybody's mind.
Yeah. I mean, I'm real honest with you. I'm not the person to be giving advice on this because like I'm still learning how to do it. Like coming from in-house talent teams to venture, like it's a little bit of a new muscle for me. Obviously, when I was in-house, I was building my network, but I was building a lot of my internal network, right? There was like 90,000
Mhm.
people at Facebook for me to build my network with. So
Mhm.
that was where a lot of it was focused. And now in my role, I've been focused a lot on externally building it. I try to, you know, when I meet with people, there's not always an immediate action either of anything I can do to help them or anything that I need from them. And so I try to just always keep that open of being available to help. So like I'll offer things I can help with even if they don't need it in the moment because then my hope is they will remember and they'll reach out to me. And that's happened a few times, like people who have reached out to me who I met like a year ago and they're like, "Hey, I have an offer. Can you help me think through like how I should approach negotiation?" And I'm
Mm,
happy to do that. It's not tied to my current role, but like I've been in recruiting long enough that I can hop on a phone call and talk through it with them. I also have tried to be better about, you know, I remember like small random things about people that I talk to, like whether it's something they said about a hobby or it's like some interest they had that they wanted to build their network. And so if I see a post that's like relevant, I often am like, oh, I should send this to that person. And I'd say like, nah, I was gonna say 40, but the truth is probably like 20% of the time I
mhm,
remember to, but I'm trying to be better about that, right? Because I feel like
mhm,
that's an organic way of, you know, just keeping in touch, just keeping communication open and really just wanting to like kind of stay up to date on like what people are doing, what they're interested in, without being like super obnoxious about it.
totally. I wonder when you are thinking about building a system for that, like how do you repetitively kind of like create a system? Like you mentioned, like maybe 20% people you would remember to send this to. I feel like I don't have like a personal CRM. I know some people have.
Yeah,
I don't know how they pull it off. I don't like I heard of like amazing founders of companies and then they would like keep like Excel sheet of like I did XYZ a favor today or like this is like what I did to XYZ. I've heard that kind
that's
of things,
interesting.
but I'm like I don't really know how to build like a personal CRM for like actually actively creating an activated network.
Yeah. I mean, I've tried a few things. Like, honestly, the people who I think that I've met who I feel like are so good at this are people who come from search.
Mm-mm.
Um, and I think it's just something with the job, how they operate. Like, I feel like they're good at it. I don't know what system they use. I don't know what CRM.
Mm.
Obviously, a lot of companies, right, are like building CRMs or using CRMs to help you. Lightspeed has a few. To be honest, I don't think there's like a really simple answer or like a magic bullet to this. I
Mhm.
personally have tried a few different ways. I tried when I started just using my notes on my computer. That was a big fail. Um, I tried doing emails because I was like, oh, maybe this will be easier for me to like search things and find them. So I would just email myself notes and then reply to my email every time I had like a new touch point or idea or anything with the person. Um, and then I've recently been trying, I don't want to like plug them, but I've been using Evernote
Mhm.
and trying to like play around with like tagging, right? Like adding tags, you can like search by tags. Honestly, none of it is great. Like, I don't know if people are able to actually, yeah, if you know anyone listening, anyone who ever listens, figure out how to do this, like just send me a message.
I will do. Actually, someone just said, like, someone recommended Eightfold is amazing and then
Okay.
pretty awesome to see. Oh, some people gave us a compliment. Anyway, so hi Lynn, hi Priyanka. Anyway, so I just wanted to quickly say hi to the audience. Okay, so one question I have is like you just mentioned about like you would help people negotiate their offer. How do you help people negotiate their offer? Like, what should people do to like have a good offer? And like I think like my biggest fear of like negotiating any offer back in time when I was like job searching was like I think like I'm I'm like, oh, I'm very thankful that I already made it to this stage. What if I like ruin it if
Yeah.
I like negotiate hard on like some random stuff? Like, I'd rather just like take it before like anything
Yes.
happened. But obviously, I think internet guru always suggests that we negotiate everything. So I
Yes.
wonder what's your thought on like this
Yeah.
thing?
And I totally get that because I can tell you, I have helped my husband negotiate offers. I have helped my friends. I have helped other family members. And I'm like, we are going to negotiate so hard on this. When it
Mm.
comes to my own offers, do you know? I mean, I don't want to give all the, but like, I am not great at it because I feel the same way. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, do I deserve this? And no, like, you do. Like, I wish I could have just, like, smacked myself in the head and been like, "Why are you questioning yourself?" But the thing about negotiating offers and why I, like, will never give people advice over email on it, and why I'm always like, "Get on the phone and talk to me," is because there's not never a one size fits all, because everything is dependent on the context. It's on the situation. Like, when someone
Mhm,
says, "Hey, I have this offer, here's a number," I have like 20 follow-up questions that I need answers
mhm,
to before I suggest how they should move forward.
mhm,
So I mean, I don't think there's like a really clear way. I think the most the biggest piece of advice is like, yes, you should negotiate an offer.
mm. Do you negotiate like, what are 3 tips that you have in this negotiation process?
Know what your end goal is. Like, don't negotiate just to negotiate, because recruiters, founders, hiring managers, like, that's the one thing that I think is very frustrating. If someone keeps asking for something, you give it to them, then they come back and they ask for a little bit more. Then you give it to them and they come back and they ask for something else,
Mhm,
right? It's like, that's not going to leave a good taste in their mouth if you end up not accepting the offer.
mhm,
And if you do, they're going to be like, that was a really weird way that person negotiated. So I
mhm,
always say, like, really figure out like what you want and then negotiate for that end goal. Don't
mhm,
think of it as, I want to see how much I can get. Think of it as, hey, this is what I'm worth, this is market value, and this is what I'm going to ask for.
mhm,
So I also think that if you know there's no chance that you're going to accept a role,
mm,
I always say, like, don't push hard to, like, change the numbers. Of course, there's a world in which having multiple offers is helpful in negotiation. So those are always things to think through, but you also have to remember, like, these are people, these are their jobs. Like, if you're just like, "I would never work at that company even if they doubled the compensation," that's a consideration in how you wanna approach your situation and navigating the compensation conversations.
mm. Um, I wonder, okay, so do people this I wanna switch gear a little bit. This is like a very different zone. Okay, so you've experienced like Figma, Thumbtack. Like, do people, let's say the Figma people who join at like employee top 10, like a first like 10 employee or whatever, do they make it to the IP? Or like not IPO, but like they got acquired, right? So like,
Yeah.
do they make it to the end? Or like, do
Well, the
most
acquisition
people just
didn't
like,
go through.
oh, okay. So, okay.
Um, so I'm trying to think of the team that was there. I wanna say, I mean, obviously, like, founders aside, there's probably a few people who have stayed until recent, actually, probably more than a few. Probably a handful of people who made it until, like, very recently, so who stayed, like, quite a long time. But I think that's gonna vary by company too, and also by what everyone's goals are. Um, Sometimes career aspirations of early employees outgrow the company. Sometimes the company outgrows the employees. Like, you never really know. But I think at Figma there was like a decent number of people who stayed, 5, 6, 7 years. But I think a lot of that was probably reflective on people being super passionate about the product, the company having really strong leadership, and so it made it easier for people to stay.
I wonder, for the people who stayed, are they like a C level or VP level employee now? Or like, are they all stayed at like their stages?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not positive. I mean, I don't think people like stayed. I'm sure that they've seen career progression. I don't know title wise like what that has looked like for them. Um, but I imagine, right, that also if you weren't seeing any career progression, you wouldn't stay for that
Yeah.
long. And if the company was intentionally not giving you career progression, you would also exit before then.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I guess like the deeper question I'm trying to ask is like, a lot of people trying to join startup because they feel like, one day they will like ring the bell on like New York Times Exchange or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, so basically, people are like looking to become like the C-level person in like a public company one day. And do that even happen? Or, like, you feel like most, like, I would say 90% of, like, the VP of engineering are gonna, like, jump ship in 2 years, like, doing, like, Series B company, and then later on, they become a VP of Facebook when it got acquired or something. Like, what does the career growth look like when people join a startup early on,
Yeah.
typically?
I so when I think about, like, I'll use engineering as the example, engineering leaders, like, there's a few different, like, types of leaders, and the ones who are really good at that, like, 0 to 1 building stage player coach role and the VP eng role, they're not necessarily the ones who are would want to or would maybe have their strengths be at a VP at a public company, where it's a lot
Mhm,
more around, like, how am I leading this organization? It's probably matrix. I'm probably, you know, managing other VPs. It's very much on the more like organizational scale side. So I don't know that it's always like a progression is VP at an early stage, and then that grows you to like a VP at a public company.
mhm,
Um, but I think that if someone's goal is I wanna be a CPO or a CTO at a
mhm,
public company, I don't know that I would tell them like, "Okay, go find like a seed or series A company to be a leader at." Like, I would
mhm,
almost say find something that's in the growth stage, because
mhm,
that's gonna be a more similar skill. It maybe also might allow them to be the, second in command, number 2 in a function, as the company is going through that IPO or as the company is public. And that's a great skill to have. If you can say, like, hey, I haven't done this before, but I reported to someone who was super strong and I saw them do this. And so you get a lot of those learnings and kind of like trickle down experience in some ways. Like that's a really great skill and something that companies do think about and will hire someone for, even if they can't say, like, yeah, I've been the C level before. But if you were number 2 to a very strong C level, like that's also really valuable.
mm. Taking notes. I
Yeah.
wonder, so okay, so I have a friend who, like, started their company as a C-level, and then eventually this company have a very big exit.
Mhm.
Like, they successfully put out from, like, like, the beginning, building this product from a garage to, like, eventually, like, leading, like, hundreds of people under their team.
Yeah.
So that has happened.
Yeah.
But I would see, like, I wonder, like, what are, let's say, 3 different stages for the person who, were growing some stuff in the garage to, like, a company that's, like, got bought for, like, billions of dollar. Like, how does that even happen? Like, I guess, like, what are some, like, core skill they need in different stages to pull this off? Because I feel like most times I've seen people who are really amazing at, like, coding a product, building a product in, like, the very early stage, the skill set is, like, very different than, like, if you're running, like, a 500 people team.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I guess, like, what kind of skill do they need to quickly adapt? And then, as for, like, since you're at a top, like, VC firm, like, how do VC firms, like, play in the role of, like, either educating them, coaching them through this, like, journey for,
Yeah.
like, rapid growth?
Yeah. I'll start with the question around kind of the stages. I think when you're the early stage, I won't spend a ton of time here because we've talked about it a little bit, but like around kind of you are that 0 to 1, you're that builder, right? You're a
Mhm,
hands-on player coach. You're scrappy, you can adapt quickly, you're great with ambiguity, right? You're getting the team
mhm,
through that. Kind of that next phase, I think, is someone who, okay, we have our foundation, but now we need to start putting in like a lot of process that maybe when we were in those early stages, we didn't either need or it just wasn't a priority, right? So someone who's really thinking about how are we structuring the team? Are we putting the team in pods? Are we
mhm,
separating by features? Are we separating by technical area? So someone who's really taking the more kind of overarching view at
mhm,
that stage, you're also probably thinking about managing managers. So you're not really necessarily that hands-on manager anymore. You're managing other leaders. And then you get to
Mhm,
kind of the next stage. And there, that's where it's like hundreds of people in the organization probably. And you're looking a lot at how am I managing. Maybe it's a multi geo team, maybe it's a multi business unit team. How am I bringing everyone together in these super matrix organizations? How am I keeping alignment and keeping us going towards kind of that final vision? And there, like, you're definitely like managing leaders. You're probably managing leaders through leaders.
mhm,
And so, like I said, someone who has the 0 to 1, like, may not innately have what, as you go through everything. But part of our role at VC here also is there are some times where you recognize, hey, this person just isn't the right leader for the stage we're at anymore. And to
mhm,
be honest, that's usually a very mutual decision because it's not necessarily a they can't do it and just that's not what they love doing.
mhm,
Um, if it's a case of, hey, this person just has like a couple gaps, but like they really are motivated and they're really strong, you can
mhm,
pair someone with a coach, with an advisor, with a mentor. And usually through that, you can really bridge a lot of those gaps. So someone in some ways they're learning while they're doing it, but that's okay, right? Because they have support systems, they have a supportive co-founder, CEO, and they have someone else externally they can rely on who can help walk them through some of these situations that maybe they've never encountered. And so I think that that is kind of the two scenarios that we've seen on either one leader growing all the way through. And I honestly don't think that's super uncommon. But it's also not uncommon if you do, need to bring in a new, say, VP Eng, when this team reaches a certain size or the company reaches a certain stage.
mm. Okay, so I wonder, I wanna switch gear a little bit. This is something that, like, I just think about, like, while you were talking. So, in a VC firm, like, as an investor, people source, pick, evaluating, and liquidating, a deal, right? So, when they're sourcing, as a people executive, like, I feel like you have built, like, a great track record on, like, recruiting, on, like, pull talents from everywhere. You have seen company grow from, like, a 7 people team to, like, a bigger team, or, like, work at big tech company. Where would you source in terms of, like, investing deals right now? Let's say if we're investing in AI right now, like, I guess, like, where do you see the biggest pool of talent coming from?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, this is one of those situations too where I think I'm not afraid to say I don't know. I don't focus in that area, so
Mhm.
I don't necessarily think I have a great perspective on like where I would source and where the talent
I
is
think
because
I'm
I think
curious. Okay.
uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
keep going.
some of what I see too is only a small percentage, right, of the
Mhm.
conversations our investors are having. I don't necessarily have visibility into like everything. Um, but I mean a lot of founders obviously come from successful companies. Not saying that they were the founders, but like maybe they were a product manager. Maybe
Mhm.
they were an engineer. But at the same time, like I think it's really hard to make these generalizations because you
Mhm.
also see a ton of new grads, right? Who are like just graduated, maybe they had an internship and they've just raised a ton of money and they have like a great company. Um so I don't really know like what I would tell someone of like where to focus cuz I don't know. I don't know that there's like a one right answer to that.
I think it's like, okay, so unless there's like some drastic differences between founder and VP of engineering, I think it's where the engineers are. Like, I think, like, I mean, I've go through like a bunch of like AI meetups or something, and I've seen a lot of like amazing talents there. But I wonder, like, where are people are not looking? Because I think you've like, if since you have helped people successfully recruit it, and those are like where the next generation funders are coming from, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, they are hanging out there. They try to join the startup to start their own startup kind of thing. So I wonder, where would you look right now that's like kind of like you feel like most people are not looking? Oh,
I
of
mean,
course, we don't want you to like give out like every secret sauce, but
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just point
Um,
us at a general direction.
well, I think I would just give like a data point of what I've seen in the market as I'm talking to people. There are quite a few people I meet, leaders on product and eng, who have left their previous role, have maybe taken a like sabbatical, travel break, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
and they're evaluating right now if they want to join a company, go find a new role, or if they want to start their own thing. And
Mm,
most frequently when I ask them like, well, what kind of company would you start? Like who would you start it with? It's always I'm talking to a few previous colleagues. Usually it's from one or two companies back. And I would say it's about 50-50 on people either have a space they're thinking about it or they don't know. They're just like, I think I would want to start something. But I don't it's hard for me to know if like this is a new trend or if it's always been around, but this is the most that I've ever heard it where people who are open to new roles are also like, but I don't really want to join like a series A or seed company because if I did that, like I would just start my own thing.
mm,
And so I think there's a little bit of, more of an overlap now to your point of talent, like candidates
mhm,
and potential founders.
mm. Okay, got it. So when you are in terms of like picking companies, I wonder like I feel like one thing I would evaluate is the team. Like that's like what matters in earlier stages. Um how would you evaluate a team's capability of success? Because and there's like, team dynamic and team chemistry. There's like team like complementary skill sets. Are they good or whatever? What are the patterns that you've seen that like take the
Yeah.
team far?
Yeah. I mean, again, right? I'm not an investor, so I'm not the
Oh,
one
we,
doing
we
this
want fresh
due
perspective. So
diligence.
yeah.
I mean, it's what stage are you think is it like a seed stage? Is it like a series B company?
Let's say seed to A.
Okay. So, right, usually at that stage, I mean, seed, there's like sometimes not really a team. Like maybe it's the founders and like
Two
an
friends.
engineer, maybe two engineers. Maybe it's just the founders. I mean, I've met with teams and I've asked how their day was, and they're like, oh, good, we set up our emails today. Okay, we're like early in this. Um, I mean, honestly, I think a lot of what people look at is like, what does the team look like? Like, right, where are their skills complementing? Do they have coverage in all the areas? In
Mhm,
terms of like, do they have someone to have the idea? Do they have the domain experience? Do they have a way to build this, whether it is either someone on the team or if they hired a strong team who can do it? Um, but also just like due diligence on like the people. Like, what do people who work with them think? Like, what are their strengths? Like, have they had success in their past roles and past products? Obviously, if people have had previous companies, like that's a great signal. Um, but I think just kind of looking at what is the person's track record, and not just building companies, but honestly, like building products, building relationships. Like those are the things that are important when you're building a company because you can have one of those skills, but if you don't have the other, it's not going to work. Like I think most people know, obviously I'm like preaching to the audience, but there's a lot that needs to go right and a lot of things that people need to do well for a company to be successful. You can't just have the most technical person and you can't just have the best idea. There's a lot of other elements that are making this work.
mm. Okay, so I wanna be mindful of the time. I have a one r I hope it's okay. I have one real question for you and then 1 minute fire round.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna keep it short. So, I'm sure at this point, a lot of listeners are trying to find a job somewhere, like, if they want to break into a startup or, like, finding a job in general, what's your advice?
Yeah. Um, I've heard that obviously it's always been hard, but like applying to applications, it's very low response rate that you're getting. And so the advice that I hear the most is, reach out to people in your network. What I hate about that advice is if you don't have the network, it puts you at such a disadvantage. And so I really wish there was a good way to solve that. But I would say like be proactive. If you do outreach that's cold outreach to someone at a company you want to work with, or it's a hiring manager, when you're sending that outreach, don't just say like, "Hey, like I'm interested in the company, I want to chat with you." Like reference the job, reference your background, reference like what you want to talk about with that person. Because it shouldn't be like I want to get an interview, right? It should be like I want to learn something or there's some type of value from connecting. I also say if you have schools, whether it's your high school, whether it's your college or some other group, like go through the alumni network.
Mm,
Find people who work at the companies you want to work with, reach out to them, learn about their path, figure out how did they get that job? How did they get that role? What did they do? And so it is always, I think, a little bit of network,
mhm,
but I don't want people who don't have the network existing to feel like, dang, like there's no way I'm going to get a job now because I don't have a network. Because there are ways that you can build it. And I'm sorry that like it is a little bit more work, I think. But it's possible. And I also, um, I mean, obviously I don't have endless time, but like I always want to help people who are looking to build their networks, whether it's me chatting with them, introducing them to someone, or just like directing them to a helpful resource. So I would say, you know, the worst thing that can happen is people say no.
totally. Okay, so on that note, I have a 1-minute quick fire round for you.
Okay.
Um, what's your favorite book?
Ooh, Crazy Rich Asians.
Oh, where can we find well, who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who? Mia Hamm.
Uh, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Um, One of my first managers, Marissa,
Where can we find you outside of work?
with my kids.
Amazing. Okay. Also, want to say hi to Anders. He have a suggestion on us about like how to track people or whatever. Anyway, Laura, this has been an amazing episode. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.